Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Unsecurity Podcast. Today's episode is number 197. I'm your host, Oscar Meeks, and joined, as always, by the wonderful Brad Nye. Hey, Brad, how's it going today?
Good. Had a break last week with Eric and Seth helping.
Yeah, it was fun having the guys on here talking some R&D, future initiatives, and all kinds of fun stuff. It was funny. I'd spent some time out in Portland, Vancouver area the week before, and we had full intentions of recording the podcast while we were there. But then we got home and said, hey, we didn't do that podcast. Yeah, it was good getting to catch up with those guys. And Kyle, one of our incident response case managers, is living out in Vancouver as well. And so spent a little time out there with Eric and Sarah and Kyle and Seth, and had an awesome time.
Very cool.
What's been going on in your neck of the woods, man?
I didn't mind the break.
Yeah.
Just been slammed with all these vendors management and that's coming in with the Department of Labor's new requirements, and we'll talk a little bit about some other stuff coming that are our way.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, like the vendor risk management stuff. This is a program we designed years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And wasn't a lot of takers. I mean, to be honest, wasn't a lot of people, even though that I think that we've expressed and emphasized the importance of knowing the security postures of your vendors. Let's go back to the target breach, right? I think that was the thing that kind of put it in the public's eyes of why this should be important. And so we've had this service and this project and this offering, and it's like Q4, the faucet turned on, right? Drinking from a fire hose right now.
Yeah, it was nuts. Well, but I think it goes to, show what we've always said. We're ahead of the curve, right? I was looking and the internal procedure document was the last update I had made on it, last update was the one I made was like August of 2019. So we were 3 years ahead of the curve on this.
Right.
What does it take? Regulatory requirement, and then suddenly people are like, "Oh yeah, we should do that." Well, duh.
Yeah. Oh, we should do that because we have to do that. I think they've known they should do that, but they're like, nobody's telling me I got to do this right away, so we'll just wait until somebody puts the hammer down.
Right. Well, and now you're going to see it with the SEC. Their comment period just closed in December for their new proposed regulations. I think they had new requirements last year about notification, publicly traded companies notifying if they're hacked. And then the new disclosures are going to require third-party risk management. And if you have a breach, now you're going to have to show that, it looks like you're going to have to show you're doing due diligence for those third parties.
And it seems like from the controls the SEC is putting forth, it's going to be everybody you have relationships with today, right? They're going to have to do some sort of vendor risk review. But then I think even before engaging with a new service provider, this is going to be a preemptive requirement, right? You're going to have to complete this before engaging.
We'll see what the final rule looks like, but and quite frankly, that's the right way to do it. So I'm happy to see that. Let's see. Hopefully it stays.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a lot of pushback already, right? Especially it seems like from smaller firms just saying like, hey, this is overly burdensome. We're not going to be able to comply with this. It's going to be a huge cost. Wah. I can't do it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, honestly, that's where services like ours come into play. It's not burdensome. You provide us with a list of your vendors, classify them because you know the relationship, and let us make that recommendation to you on if they should have remediation or you should accept. Let an expert help you out on that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's probably what a lot of people, it's going to be new to. They don't understand that, like, hey, I'm going to have to do this myself and I have no idea what I'm doing.
Right.
But the reality is there's people out there that can help. And two, like, just to be transparent, like, cost isn't a barrier of entry here. This is a pretty low
No,
cost service that we've tried to make affordable, and hopefully other firms are doing the same thing because people need this service and
right,
we want it to be accessible for people.
right. Yeah, I mean, and we've got the tools and processes in place and make it more streamlined. You're not running and looking through, a SIG questionnaire. It's 600 things you have to interpret, or a spreadsheet
Mm-hmm.
or a PDF that you have to fill out. We've really worked to make it as painless as possible.
Yep.
And we're
Yeah,
actually
for sure.
getting really good feedback from vendors about our process, which is rare.
Well, it's awesome. I mean, it's streamlined. It is easy to understand. I feel like even the assessments
Mhm.
are pretty easy to understand. And, it's an efficient, quick way for a business to offload something that's very confusing to them, to someone who knows what they're doing here. We just take all that
Right.
headache away.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. I would go to them for, financial expertise and not
Yeah.
assume I know how to do it, right? It's the
Yeah.
same concept.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So the framework, just to go over that a little bit, this is obviously, in review after the comment period, but right now it says before retaining a service provider to perform a covered function. Now, a function, and that is a function or service that is necessary to provide advisory services, and if not performed or performed negligently, would be reasonably likely to cause a material negative impact.
Mhm.
So pretty much every vendor, maybe
Yeah.
some your low risk vendors, and right, we take that into account. But before they can retain it, they have to do due diligence, nature and scope of the covered function, potential risks resulting from the service provider performing that function, service providers' competency, capacity, and resources, material subcontracting agreements. So is your service provider doing third party, right?
Mhm.
So that's going to drive a whole nother level of vendor risk management and third party risk management, because now
Right.
anybody that's servicing somebody under SEC now has to do it.
Hmm.
And then coordination with them about federal security laws, and then orderly termination of the function.
Hmm.
It's yay, hooray! It's clear to me that it makes sense, and it covers those things that you need to do.
Yeah. It's really forcing the issue for something that we know has needed to be done for a long period of time.
Right.
What's really interesting to me too, like back to the SEC statements, if you've seen like some of the pushback, some of the smaller firms are pushing back, but then also like the SEC commissioner is pushing back as well, which is really interesting, essentially stating like, what's the problem we're trying to fix here? And that statement to me is hilarious. Because
Right.
again, like we've talked about before, the people who are creating these rules and they're in the authoritative position to essentially cause change, oftentimes don't understand the reasoning behind this change. And furthermore, I mean, if you look at the comments, there's a complete disconnect with what the purpose of this is
Mm-hmm.
and how it will benefit all of these entities that fall under the SEC's commission. And yeah, maybe I'm just graphing a little bit, but it kind of blows my
No,
mind. And we see this over and over again from the
still
government level, the SEC here, and all parties involved that have that influence.
right. Well, I think that goes to show that we as information security professionals aren't doing a good job educating,
Hmm.
right? Should there be somebody at the SEC that's letting them and briefing the commissioner about this? Yeah, probably.
Hmm.
Have they done it well? Apparently not.
Right, right. I think that's
And
a challenge too. It's like, I mean, maybe we're failing at educating. Maybe we're failing at, like we talk about, having a common language that everyone can understand. Also, at the end of the day, too, I feel like for the people in these positions, they have to want to be educated. They have to accept the open knowledge and just that open knowledge and try to understand that.
yeah,
And I think it's a problem on both sides. I think we can do better communicating, but I think that we can somehow institutionalize a way for our leaders in these authoritative positions to be able to, or be forced to actually have some sort of education or some sort of representative on their council that has the knowledge we have.
yeah. Well, and I think you're right. It's a combination. And I think a lot of what I've seen is leaders that don't, air quote, get it are having people explain it to them in a way that they, like you said, they don't understand it. They just check
Hmm.
out.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
So it should be, this doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain it a different way? That would be a great
Hmm.
feedback if you don't get it, instead of just being like, sure, whatever. Why are we doing this?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
So,
maybe for our listeners too, like maybe I'm sure we have some people that are here talking about vendor risk management, and maybe it's new still. I don't really understand what that process looks like, but when we're assessing a vendor, right, what are the things we're looking for? Like, what does that process look like, and what are we really trying to determine?
yeah. So it's all about risk mitigation, right? You're never going to have vendors that have a perfect, no risk. So it's more about understanding and looking at where their gaps are, and knowing, okay, so maybe they're scoring poorly in a certain area, they're not doing certain things, but do they have the fundamentals in place? So kind of
Hmm.
from our standpoint, when we look at this and review it, we obviously are using a S2 vendor, so it's at S2 score 300 to an 850. We're saying that vendor needs to have a score of it to get an accepted result on the first try with no remediation. They have to score
Hmm.
at least a 660. They have to have information security policies. They must do security training at least annually. They have to have an IR plan in place and test it, DR plan in place and test it. You need to have encryption of data in transit at rest, and multi-factor for all um, admin logins and general usage
Hmm.
logins that are externally available.
Right.
So, there, I've had vendors that scored 800, but the one thing they didn't have was multi-factor. And it's like, no, they got remediation actions.
Yeah.
You
Right.
need to do this because that is presenting a huge risk to their organization,
Hmm.
which in turn presents a risk to my organization.
Yeah, and we see cases like this all the time. I mean, not at liberty to talk about this transparently, but I can say another case this week that we came
Mm-hmm.
in where we saw essentially someone providing a service as a vendor had access to their environment compromised, and as a result of that, there were multiple of their clients that were severely impacted because of that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think this is like just standard due diligence stuff we should have been doing anyway. And honestly, when I look at the vendor risk management, like this is in line with what insurance companies are demanding now as well, right? So any company that is going to be insured moving forward with a cyber insurance plan, they're going to have to meet this criteria. If they want to have business relationships, through the DOL or through the SEC, they're going to have to meet this criteria. So overall, while I feel like there's probably things that we're going to mature and get better at here, this is a step in that right direction of really forcing the issue for things that we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly talking about on here.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And like I said, those things that I just listed off, those are the immediate deal breakers. They
Mm-hmm.
could have all those and still have remediation, right? It's not like, oh, we checked off these 6 things and we're good to go. Those are the immediate. If you
Yeah.
don't have it, you're immediately going to remediation.
Right, right. And then too, if we want to find out if they've have a breach history, right? That's really important to
Yep.
understand if there's a pattern of compromise in their past, and
Yep.
kind of force the issue on that to a more detailed assessment if that's the case. What have you done to fix your environment? How have you improved to ensure that, okay, you had that breach 10 months ago? How can we be confident and knowing that's its likelihood to happen again is lower than it was then?
Yep. Yeah. And we recently, in the last month had a vendor that filled out a questionnaire and had suffered a breach.
Hmm.
And they provided what they'd done, and I was really impressed. They
Hmm.
did the right things, and it was like, that's kind of refreshing to see that.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's sad it took a breach for that to happen. Like, what were they doing before? If you look at what they've had to change, but they're doing things right now, and that's what we always kind of joke about. Is there's two kinds of people. You can tell a security program if they've got funding and everything's going great. Most likely, a decision maker up top has gone through a breach before, and it's like, I do not want to do that again. Right?
100%, man. I couldn't agree more. It's like, it's really difficult when we worked with these people and our partners that have had a significant breach or an incident. And it's tough. It's like we always say, it's that person responsible in our clients' organization, it's like the worst day of their career. It's
Oh,
typically going to be the worst day of their career, right? But that being said, I see so many success stories on the back end where it was an eye-opening experience. It really woke them up for how they should be treating security internally. And then suddenly, man, they take that shit seriously. They kick it into high gear. And some of the clients we work with now, we're partners because they had that incident. They came in, we helped them get going. And now they're some of our best partners moving forward because they really, really care about the success of their security program.
Right. Yeah. It's sad that, it does take that so many times. Harmon, our president, says like, man, I wish we didn't have to have an IR group. Well, that's sadly not the reality, right?
Yep.
Like, ideally, we would be proactive and prevent these, but so many times, people are like, especially those smaller firms that are probably the less well equipped to survive it, are the ones that say, it's not going to be me, and then you've got a 10-person company down. They probably don't have a huge buffer there to play with that a rack space would have.
Yeah, chance of recovery, the smaller businesses after suffering through a serious incident, it decreases. Your chance of recovery is linear with the size of your business, essentially. And
I don't remember the stats. I know we've talked about it on the podcast before, but so many don't make it another 6 months, and then even more don't make it at another 12 months. Like, it's sad.
Yeah, and that is why I can say, like, we push so much for proactive incident response services. One of my favorite sayings, again, Harmon, I think I heard say this first, but it's the worst time to test your incident response plan is in the middle of an incident. And there is no more true words spoken than that. It's 100% accurate.
And it's sad because
and we can say, like, those people that we work with, right, who do care about having that plan in place. They're doing the tabletops, right? They're listening to us on how to properly back up their data, to all those things. When they have that incident, their chance of recovery is light years ahead of those who aren't prepared. And just being prepared is so important. I'm working on an article right now with our marketing team about the mean time to respond, right? And that's a statistic you don't hear a lot of people like articulate. Everybody thinks about the mean time to detect, right? That's something that's like advertised in all the EDR tools, SIEM tools, reduce your mean time to detection, reduce your mean time to detection. But the point of my article is you may have the tool set in place right now to have a quick detection time, but do you know how to respond? And the mean time to response is just as, if not as important as the mean time to detect.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'll humble brag here. One of my customers, they really have worked hard on it. They got an alert and had the infected machine off the network in 28 minutes.
Yeah, that's
unheard of.
Yeah. And even better, I bet they didn't power it off. I bet they left it running and got it off the network.
Yep. Yeah, they're good. Yep. They're good to work with, but it was usually how long is it going to be? How many calls come into the IR team on a Thursday or Friday? And it's like, well, we tried to look at it all week and we couldn't figure it out. Now, it's a weekend. We can't leave it all weekend. We need help.
Yep. And I talk about
proper response is important too.
100%. Like, we see that, and not shaming anyone. Everybody's going to respond based upon the knowledge they have and what they know how to do. But if you don't have that true internal blue team expertise or that true internal forensic expertise, and you try to hold on to something, you say, hey, I'm going to try to figure this out for 2 or 3 days, and then you get to that point where it's Thursday, it's Friday, and you say, you know what, I think we might be in more trouble than I realize. Let me call someone who, has expertise in incident response. When we get that call and you've already dabbled and held on to it for 2 to 3 days, it causes a mess for us. A few reasons. Like, number one, we see a lot of people like, oh, gut reaction, let me power this box down. And as soon as you power that box down, we're losing artifacts. Number
Yeah.
two, the big thing is we see that as with any increase in times elapsed for that response, guess what? Artifacts are deteriorating and artifacts are being lost. Log data, particularly.
Yeah.
We see that, log data in a lot of cases and organizations rolls over very, very quickly. And we're not just looking at one specific log event here. We're really taking a cumulative approach to see all the logs that are available in your environment. And maybe you do have your IS logs tuned, so you're saving those for 30 days. But what about your domain controller logs?
Mm-hmm.
And we see those DC logs, man, they roll over. Sometimes every 6 hours they're rolling over. And if you're not
I've seen
backing
one
those
that
up,
was 2 minutes.
yeah,
2.5 minutes, somewhere right in that frame.
Yeah. And so it's critically important that, if you have the in-house staff that they know how to handle, that's great, but they can kick off that response immediately. If you don't have that staff in-house, like, have a damn good partner that you can call at any time and get them on board, because, as that time increases, your chance of being able to thwart the attack decreases significantly as well.
Oh, and the other thing is, if you engage a partner, work with them. The reason they're telling you to do things, don't actively sabotage it because, it's causing a problem, so we need to take this off. Or we think that your tool is causing a problem, so we're just disabling it and uninstalling it. And I don't think I've seen that actually happen. Where's the tool? Most likely you've got malware on your network.
Yeah, and I've seen, situations where maybe the tool is slowing down processes or, overutilizing resources, but we can tune those tools, just communicate with us, and so we can make adjustments to that tool to not impact your business any more than we have to.
So we don't have full visibility.
Yeah, and that's something we've seen before too. And again, not shaming anyone. Everybody's just, acting on the experience and the knowledge they have. But I feel like sometimes, we're working a case, could be a little, I don't know if combative, but there can be friction sometimes between your tech team, right, and your leadership team and the incident response team, because people have a fear of retribution. We can see that this particular vulnerability was being exploited in your environment because you're missing this patch, right? And so some people will think, that patching was my responsibility. I didn't do that patch, and so I'm going to have retribution against me because of this. So what does that person do? Maybe they unintentionally or intentionally destruct evidence so that can or cannot be proven. We've seen that before. And so always understand there's never any shaming involved here. We don't. Oh, no. Yeah. It's like, hey, if there is a problem, it's not an individual's problem, right? It's an organizational problem. Let's help you solve those problems from an organizational level, not on an individual approach.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Okay, why was that patch missed? Well, because they're understaffed and he had 3 other things going on and missed the patch window. Well, that's a leadership issue for not funding appropriately, right?
Yep.
So it's not necessarily on one thing. It's going to be, like you said, I don't want to say blame because that's not the right word, but there's enough accountability for everyone. Nobody's hands-free. Scott gets off scot-free on this.
Yeah. And, my approach, I think our approach is always on this. Security isn't any individual's responsibility, right? Security is an organizational responsibility here. And so, maybe there was a mistake made by an individual, but it's not necessarily that individual's full responsibility for overseeing that.
Right.
It's the organization's responsibility for identifying those things. So,
and I think the team does a fantastic job, on those initial calls and getting going of, hey, look, I think a lot of the combativeness too is not just the fear of retribution, but also hey, you're telling me I wasn't doing my job right.
Yeah.
So they want to defend themselves and what they've done. And we don't care. That's not what we're here for. We're here to help.
Yeah. Yeah, 100% of the time, our goal is to help. And if we point out something that was done wrong, it's not a personal attack. It's never a personal attack. It's like, hey, let's grow together here. This is an opportunity for us to grow, mature, and improve our security posture as one, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and who hasn't made mistakes, right? I mean, you and I both worked IT long enough that.
Oh, yeah.
I know. Yeah. I know. I did a vulnerability scan on a network or not a vulnerability, just a port scan, and took down all the time clocks at a bunch of different locations.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah.
How the
I can
heck
tell
was
some
I going to
stories.
know that? Like, I had no idea.
Yeah, I've corrupted an entire DNS zone before. That was
Yeah,
awesome
I
because
mean,
I had to manually rebuild my DNS afterwards. That was dope. But luckily, you know what? I had a backup of that DNS, man. So I was able to get that rolling again. My biggest mistake ever is I think I may have told this story on here before, but I was really young in my career and I was sent to do some storage work on an EMC SAN and didn't have any EMC experience at the time, but it's like, oh, you'll figure it out. I'm like, cool, dope, I'll figure it out. And so I'm essentially, attaching a new shelf, storage shelf to the SAN and trying to bind the LUN. And this is an old version of the EMC UI. And unbind LUN and bind LUN were right beside each other. And I was using an
oh
old
no.
KVM keyboard with the trackball. And
Oh
as I
no.
go to click bind LUN, it just bloop went down one. I clicked unbind LUN and I unbound our entire SAN. And there was no, at this time again, during, this is a long time ago, over 20 years ago now. And there was no opportunity to rebind that line. All our data was absolutely gone. But luckily,
Ooh.
you know what? We had offline backups, bro. So I spent like a week restoring data from offline backups.
Oh, God. That's definitely one of those, like, you just feel the pit, your heart drop to the pit
Oh,
of your
yeah.
stomach. You just are like, oh
Mm-hmm.
no.
Yeah, I got sick to my stomach at that point, and I was young. It was like, oh man, I'm going to get canned. I'm getting my ass
Mhm.
canned today for this. But that was like, I was young, and it was a good learning experience for me, and I learned it during that time. It's like we all make mistakes. It's okay
Yep.
to make mistakes, and it's not that you made the mistake; it's how you recover and how you respond from that mistake.
Right.
And so,
That's
yeah,
always been my thing. Like, everyone's going to make a mistake. I don't care if you make a mistake, if you, like you said, respond correctly.
yep,
Where I have a problem is if you keep making the same mistake over and over again and don't learn from it. That's an
100%,
issue.
100%. That's an issue.
So
Yeah. Oh, cool, man. Yeah, I don't even think we meant to go down the incident response path today, but this has been great conversations.
that's what's great about this is
Yeah.
who knows where it's going to end up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe quickly to touch on a couple of things. You had I don't know, a pretty interesting flaw on Facebook and Instagram. I think you want to chat about a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah. So let me find it again. So they had an issue, and this is why we talk about two-factor not being a silver bullet. Facebook and Instagram flaw had a flaw that would let anyone bypass two-factor. Basically, they didn't have rate limiting enabled. So if you knew somebody's, email and phone number, you could basically brute force multi-factor and get into their account. That's not ideal. The other is that you could also unbind their phone from their account if you had a phone number. So you just needed a phone number and a new email, and you could then revoke their two-factor through of SMS.
Yeah, that
So,
one to me kind of blows my mind. Like both of those actually blow my mind. There's
I
no rate
know.
limit. You could brute force your MFA. Like, come on, you're better than that, Facebook. And also, like, that's such a trivial like path to exploit. I can find your phone number, Brad. I can find your
Oh,
Facebook account. So it would be easy for me to
oh,
say, I'm going to
you
revoke your
can't find my
MFA.
Facebook because I don't have one, but I
Right.
never have. But yeah,
If you were, we could find
right,
it. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, it
right,
would be
absolutely.
super easy to revoke. And you think about, too, like, well, I don't know. We're going back here. How many people that are on Facebook right now that would be soft targets, what we consider? They've already
Oh
got
my goodness.
passwords leaked somewhere. And so I think gaining access to those Facebook accounts is probably could have been pretty trivial during the time that
Mm-hmm.
this exploit was known.
Right. Well, and it's also a good reason to not use SMS or push
Mm-hmm.
notifications.
Yep.
I always recommend using the code from an authenticator app.
Yep.
It just
Using.
eliminates another thing. It makes it that much harder for an attacker to get in.
Yep. Yeah. Same thing. I don't like push SMS or push to approve. MFA, we've talked about that before. Google Authenticator or any authentication app is much
Yep.
better. And I think, yeah, to your point, like this is proves MFA is not a silver bullet. It is a step in the right direction. It significantly improves your security posture, but there are flaws, and MFA can be defeated at times, which goes back to like why it's so important to understand what a strong password is, how to use strong passwords effectively, and using that for not just in the business, for your personal accounts as well.
Yep. 100% agree.
Yep. Cool. And I guess the other one quickly, that's kind of a win for the good guys, right? The FBI took down the Hive ransomware group, which is pretty dope. I think they said at the time what there was around 300 victims or something that was like in the infrastructure.
Million.
Yeah. Yeah, they estimated it would have been 130 million in ransom if they were able to, affect all of their victims that were in the system. And it sounds like they had a C2 in 300 victims environment. If you get that C2 in there, typically it's pretty bad news if they've been able to successfully deploy that implant. And so, and they also got the ransom keys too, right? So for folks who had previously been affected by the Hive, they were able to deliver decryption keys, and so now you can get your data back. I think we've talked about that on here before too, like why it's important. Like if you have that ransom event, your data gets encrypted, and maybe you don't have a path to recovery, you don't pay the ransom. Still saving that data is important because you never know when those decryptors are going to become available.
Right. Yeah. What's crazy is they actually infiltrated in July of 22, and the news didn't break until like last week. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very surprised they were able to keep it under the covers for that long, and also like makes me feel pretty good about this organization. And sounds like they had a pretty good plan here. 300
entities under attack and 1,000 decryption keys to previous victims. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So, they're going to set up another shop for sure. We know that. We've seen it before. But I still am happy to see an impact like this. It says, because they had a foothold in 300 organizations.
Right.
Guess what? You're going to go start all over again.
Yep. Just buys us more time to tighten things up.
Yep, for sure. Well, heck yeah, man. This has been a fun episode. I think it's time for some shout outs. Who do you got?
Yeah. I'm going to give a shout out to Megan. Just been working with her closely on some of this VRM stuff and realizing how well we complement each other with our different strengths. And, I'm like, yeah, let's go do this. And I can just do it. And she's like, oh, wait, time out. How do we get other people to do it? I'm like, I don't know, just do it.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of fun to kind of work with her on some of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. Megan is awesome, and her brain is so analytic. She's so like process driven. Like she can hear things and like put them into a structure, and like I don't know, in a way that a lot of people just don't have that brain. And she is so good at that.
I just know what to do.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to give a shout out to Shane, one of our associates here on the team. He's been with the team for I think about 10 months, 9 months, something like that. Yeah, he's approaching a year. He's an associate, and I'm continually just blown away by this guy's work. He does an incredible job, always has an incredibly positive attitude. People love being around him and hearing him talk, and just generally a kick-ass dude. So shout out to you, Shane.
I agree.
Yep.
He's a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah, Shane's fantastic. Hopefully he's listening, and hopefully he hears this, because I'm not going to tell him I did that. He has to come listen to this and find out.
I like it. We'll see.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in for another episode. Thanks, Brad, for joining me as always, and we'll talk to you guys soon. See ya.